Hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face and my card making space. And some more holiday cards for my 2023 holiday card series, which I'll have a link in the end screen at the end of the video with my playlist with all the videos I've done so far. And I'll just keep adding to it. And yeah, no coloring. Not really any techniques at all. This is just simple layered stamping. I'm using the CZ Design Winter Wishes set that came out last month, I think. Again, my sense of time is just, it's gone. It's just gone. Anyway, what started out is I was going to do just like one, maybe two, try to keep it a little more clean and simple. And then I ended up like stamping pretty much every single image multiple times, did a ton of die cutting and added splatter, all the things, and had fun with it and made 4 cards. So yeah, still snuck some splatter in, but I kept off the bling and I had fun making these. So, and I also used some of the new colors that Simon just released the beginning of this month in December. They released 6 more colors of their positively saturated inks, which I've done many videos using them. And yeah, they've been releasing more desaturated or like kind of muted trios of colors because they released 6 colors last month and I used 3 of them. I have them all like piled up here. I used the greens again in this video, so they're just lovely. And then I used the new red trio, and yeah, the ones they released that last month and then just recently, much more sort of like muted colors, and love it. It's just filling in the line in my opinion. So I used those, and then yeah, splatter, some die cutting, all the good things. So if you keep watching, I will show you guys how I made these cards. So yeah, my original intent with making these cards was I was only going to make like 1 or 2, and I was going to keep them a little more, attempt for a little more clean and simple, which is not my wheelhouse. I like to add all the things and have fun with it. But I have a serious admiration for clean and simple cards and people that can achieve them, because they take skill. And so that's what I was aiming for. And then I just couldn't stop stamping and die cutting and ended up with the cards I ended up with, which I'm still happy with. So first thing I did was I had my MISTI, and I have one of my grip mats in my MISTI and white cardstock, and I'm stamping the first layer of the poinsettia images. And in this set, the layered images are labeled. So like there's A1, A2, A3 for this large poinsettia. And after I stamped that in the small one, I just pulled out, and I always forget the grid transparency. I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce it. It's got a long name. I've shown it in a bunch of videos. You can also use the back of the stamp packaging, etc. I just use that to protect my cardstock when I'm moving my stamps around so that I don't have to clean off my stamps. It's just sort of a lazy thing, but at the same time, it saves me time. So I'd put the grid transparency and move the stamps so I could stamp these the base of these florals several times. So that's also in the end why I ended up doing more cards, because like, I've got, enough florals to make 4 cards basically. So like I said, the layering images in the set, 'cause not all of them layered, just the poinsettias, the the solid leaves have a layer, and then the little sort of berry branch images. Everything else is like greenery and filler. So I stamped the first layer of the poinsettias, and I used Punch Positively Saturated ink. That was the latest shade in this red trio. And then this little detail layer is Sangria. So stamp that. I find that with these, like, they were just easy to line up. You don't really need to be particular about ones like this. There are some layering stamps where you do really need to pay attention, because like all the layers build up to create, a cohesive image. With this, the layers are just like adding detail. So I was just like, stuck it down, didn't worry about it. And they look great. I love it. So did the same thing, used my little grid transparency so I could move the stamps without having to clean them, so I don't get, ink smears and whatnot everywhere. And then for the centers, I decided not to even use the MISTI. Like, I kept the cardstock in there because the grip mat gave it a bit of cushioning. But I just used that little grid block because this was just faster for me. And I stamped the floral centers with VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. Another option was I was going to gold heat emboss the flower centers, but I would need to let the ink like really dry because it takes a little bit to let it, dry, smooth out, do its thing. And I was like, no, I'm just going to stamp it in black. And then if I changed my mind later, like when I assembled the cards, I was like, ooh, I could add like a bit of gold bling, to the centers because that would look cute too. But yeah, heat embossing them would look nice. You just got to let the ink dry first so that the when you stamp the centers and add the emboss powder, it only clings to what you stamped and not the entire flower. So I did all of that. And then I get into the other layering images, which the leaves and these little branches. So those I inked up with cabbage ink, the light green of the ink trio, and stamped both the base of the leaves and the little berry branches with that color. And yeah, I've got these pieces, like I'd just taken a sheet of Simon Smooth White cardstock, cut it in half, and then filled it, both pieces, with all these stamped images. So stamped all of the bases with that cabbage ink. And then I'm going to line up the little berries and then the little, spines and veins of these leaves. So get those lined up. Now with these, I'm using 2 different colors of ink because one is for the leaves, one is the berries. So you could do it separately, but they were spaced far enough apart that I was just like, I'll just ink up what I need with each color. So for the actual berries, I did Cabernet ink, so the darkest red. And then the spines of the leaves, I honestly can't remember if I used artichoke or kale. I think I used artichoke, which is the medium green. Yeah, that's what I used. Kale is the darkest green. I use that for some of the greenery. So I can just sort of eyeball it, but another way is you can see you partially close the lid, so you can just look through the lid to show where the ink pad is. So you're inking up the stamps with the different colors of ink and not overlapping and mixing them up. Either way works. So I just would ink up the berries, ink up the little veins, stamp, rotate the cardstock, repeat. And then for all of the other little images, these are the ones that are just like greenery and filler images. There's no layering needed. So these, I just pulled out all my scraps of white cardstock. I've talked about this a lot. I keep all my scraps. I usually keep them all in a bin with my white cardstock. I just keep it with my full sheets of white cardstock because I reach for scraps before I reach for full pieces. And especially white cardstock scraps, I use them up. I do things like this. I'm going to actually use other scraps later on in the video to stamp my sentiments. And this was perfect because I had a whole bunch of strips of cardstock from cutting down, pieces for various things. And they were just the perfect size for all these little greenery pieces. So I just put them onto acrylic blocks and just filled all of these pieces. I kind of just went a little bit nuts. At this point, I wasn't 100% sure how many cards I was going to make, how much greenery I was going to need. In the end, off camera, I actually ended up stamping a few more. So this looks like a lot, but I actually used more than this. But I did quite a few. And after everything was stamped, so I had all those layering stamps done, all of this stamped, I start cutting everything apart. And I put them in just piles of the same image because I have the coordinating wafer dies, but there's only one wafer die. And I've got, 6 of each image or 4 of each image or whatever it is, So I do all, just like with everything, I do everything in batches, or like Tim Holt says, compartmental making, where you do just one thing at one time. So I did all my stamping, at one time. And then I'm sitting and just trimming out all the different sections. So I just sit, trim everything out, and I've just got it all in little piles here of the same thing. Once I've got that done, then I'm going to put my wafer dies into place. So it's stuff like this specifically, because it's like, this is kind of mindless, I don't really need to be paying a whole lot of attention. I'm not doing my stamping. I'm just die cutting. This is where I will turn on, I've got a show going or a podcast or audiobook, just something. And I'm just like watching my show, lining up my wafer dies, doing all my die cutting. So doing it all in batch, it just makes things go faster. And yeah, I don't find this really tedious in any way because it's like, oh, this is the time I get to like enjoy my shows, and getting other things done. So I line up all the wafer dies just using little bits of washi tape. This was the most time consuming because again, I'm doing like several cards and I did a ton of die cutting, but I don't time myself. And also this is my time to, enjoy my little show or whatever. So once I've got all the wafer dies in place, I'm using just my EMPRESS die cut machine because I can fit everything onto this plate. and I die cut. And I'm not going to show this over and over again, but I just keep repeating the process till everything was die cut. And I've got them all in piles again. And then for my sentiments, more strips of scraps of cardstock. I pulled out I keep it on my desk, one of the little Simon foam paws. This just gives a little bit of cushioning. I like it for that. You can also use them like if you're piercing things, doing poking things out of die cuts. You can stick them on this too. It's the exact same thing as a mouse pad. This is just cuter, So anyway, I use that though to give me a little bit of cushion because I'm stamping one of the sentiments from the set. I'd used my anti-static powder tool, and I'm inking up and stamping the sentiment with clear embossing ink. And I just used the mouse pad because I was using an acrylic block, because then I can stamp multiples. And I stamped an extra one just in case. There was space on that strip of cardstock, and more often than not, I like to stamp an extra sentiment because you never know if I've messed one up, etc. So it just gives me a little bit of wiggle room. And then after that, I die cut those with the same, like the coordinating wafer die. And then my card bases are going to be top folding A2 white note cards. And on the inside of the card, I'm going to stamp another sentiment from that same set. And that I inked up and stamped with Concord and 9th Stardust ink. I've talked about this one a lot. I like using this one in lieu of like gold metallic ink or gold heat embossing. Because I was going to gold heat emboss this sentiment on the inside of the cards, but then I was like, nah, I just don't want to. I was like, I'd rather just stamp it and go on to the next thing, save me a couple steps. So I inked it up, stamped it with that ink. And then I also used the Simon Says Stamp Pincushion plate wafer die. I'm kind of obsessed with this wafer die. I told you guys I'd be using this one a lot because it's just fabulous. It's one of those patterns where it's like, this can just work for anything. And when you do tone on tone like this, it just gives, some extra texture, but it's not super busy. But then if you really want the pattern to pop a bit more, you can back it with a different color or specialty cardstock, like gold cardstock, gold glitter cardstock. That would have looked amazing on this, but I wanted to keep the background just very tone on tone. So I just did it with white cardstock and then adhered them on top of all the card bases. And then you can't see it, but off camera, I had already arranged all of my greenery and my florals. So I'm following that arrangement. And I didn't bother showing that because, again, I was watching a movie or something and, figuring out, I've talked about this. Floral arrangements is, again, also not my wheelhouse. It's something that I don't really have an eye for, and I'm fine with it. Some people can just arrange clusters, whether it's stamped or die cut images or like actual real flowers. Flower arrangement is an art. I love it. I love it. Sometimes I get it. I'm happy with what I did here. But it's not my forte. So I spent a while figuring out what would work. And yeah, so I had one off to the side already figured out. So I'm just following it here while I'm filming it. And again, I've got little piles of all of my die cuts because I just, I made piles for each card. It's like, okay, they all get this. So then it's just a matter of figuring out that layout, which I did, and then adhering it. And for all of the adhering for the images, I used just craft tacky glue. The sentiment I popped up with just some thin foam squares. And then that one small poinsettia on the fronts, I added one foam square to the edge of it because it's on top of, like a pile of die cuts basically. So I added that and that was it. So I got all those adhered onto the fronts. And then on the insides, I did the same thing. You can see this one on screen. I figured out my little arrangement because I kept aside a few more of the little stamped die cut images and adhered them around the sentiment on the insides of the cards and then repeated it. Could be done here. You could totally stop. They look great. They're fine. I wanted to add splatter, of course. So since I already had the sentiments adhered, because normally I would do the splatter, then add the sentiment at the end, I just die cut just scraps of copy paper with the coordinating wafer die for the sentiment and stuck that on top just to protect the sentiment so I don't get a bunch of splatter on it to obscure the wording. So that just protects it. So did that, stuck these in my splat box, and I'm using my Gonzai Tombi Starry Colors. I added water to the one I wanted to use, and then you just got to work it in really well with your brush till you get the consistency you want. So I'm just using my little fan brush, and then I'm going to splatter this all over the card fronts. So it just gives it that little extra something that I love. So I splattered all of this, and then after I was, happy with the amount of splatter, I'm going to carefully take these out of the splat box, set them aside to dry, and then I'm going to put another, just that same scrap of copy paper into the splat box, just so I don't put the next cards in there and get any of the over spray, of the watercolor. I didn't want that to smear on those card bases. So that's why that's there. And then use those same die cuts to protect the sentiments. Splattered these as well. Let everything dry. Once they're dry, these cards are complete. Like I said, I decided not to add any bling or anything. I've got the cluster of all the little images and the sentiment, the die cut background, the splatter. And I like how they turned out. You could totally add some bling. I had my gold glitter bling sitting here. It would have looked great, but I was like, no, this is good. This is good. So this is as close to clean and simple as I got this time anyway. Anywho, as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. In the blog post will be pictures, picture links to all the supplies, so it's a little easier to navigate. So you can check that out below if you're interested. And then at the end, I'll have a link to my playlist, so you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I'll see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.